We all like to think of childhood as this time of joy and innocence. But, I mean, for many of us, it's just not true.
We just pretend all those things don't happen. Our investment in the denial is so high.
Kids are young, they're very resilient, they don't know what's going on, they won't remember anyway. Well, the child may not remember, but the body remembers.
This is the biggest public health discovery we've ever seen.
It blew my mind, just blew my mind.
We didn't know that all of these kind of problems have a common cause. There was this incredible gee whiz effect. You mean adverse childhood experiences cause heart disease and lung disease and liver and cancer?
The impact is on your behavior, it's on your learning, it's on your heart, it's on your DNA. Like, how do you deal with all that stuff?
The biggest problem that we need to avoid is people not wanting to talk about it, or people not wanting to address it.
We have a whole new body of knowledge now that could open up new ways of thinking about what we have up till now been seen as intractable, unsolvable problems.
And if you can weave the science through these different sectors and get it into the hands of the general population, they will invent very wise actions.
It's there, it's possible. And a defeatist kind of attitude or a sense of futility is completely disconnected from what 21st century science is telling us. And we should be going after that like a bear.
My strongest belief, especially as a person that's been working in public health now for more than 25 years, is this information needs to get to everyone, not just us, not just the smart people like us, right? Back in the 1980s, I became interested in the emotional underpinnings of disease and behaviors. How things like depression might affect the incidence of cardiovascular disease. Back then, it was really controversial, and people actually laughed at us for getting into that kind of work and say, well, Rob, what does this have to do with public health or medicine? And they're saying, well, he's nuts.
The key message that we have learned is that a totally different kind of history-taking needs to be done.
My colleagues assured me that I was crazy to think about doing this.
What one finds from this is quite important.
Vince Folletti and I, we didn't know it, but we were working in parallel fields.
That's a hard question. I started really getting heavy after the molestation.
I started routinely inquiring about childhood sexual activity and was really overwhelmed because it seemed that every other person I was asking was providing me a history of childhood sexual abuse. And I vividly remember thinking, this can't be true. People would know. Somebody would have told me. Wasn't that what medical school was for?
I did blame myself for not saying anything. I should have said something. But then again, I had no one really to tell that I would trust.
Weight gain most commonly.
A good friend of mine at the CDC who's studying obesity met Vince.
He commented to me, look, you know, if what you're saying is true, it's got enormous importance for the country and for the practice of medicine, but nobody's going to believe your 286 cases, no matter how well you've studied them.
He said, you need to talk to my friend Rob, who's looking at some of these emotional and psychiatric underpinnings of disease.
What we need is a large epidemiologically sound study with thousands of people in it.
Let's pull this all together and show the big picture.
A study of over 17,000 middle-class adults here at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego.
It was a well-educated group of people. Most have been to college.
In no way could you dismiss this as, well, you know, I don't see people like that in my practice, etc. You know, that's them across town.
There are questions like, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Did your parents ever swear at you, insult, or put you down, or hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured?
We ran into serious opposition.
Touch or fondle your body in a sexual way. Was anyone in your household depressed or mentally ill, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of your family?
You can't ask patients questions like that.
Did your father ever repeatedly hit your mother over at least a few minutes, or you didn't have enough to eat?
You're going to cause people to decompensate. You may make occasional people suicidal.
Did anyone in your household ever go to prison?
As though it were generally agreed that repression is the best approach to life's traumas, certainly the most comfortable for other people.
So the first thing that we found is that adverse childhood experiences are common. 28% had been physically abused. 27% grew up with substance abuse in their homes. 13% witnessed their mothers being physically abused. 1 in 5 had been sexually abused. I was the first person to see this data. I was in my study, I had the software on my computer, I saw this, and I wept. I had no idea how much adversity and abuse and neglect and violence there was in our culture. There were 10 types of adversity. We added them up. The first thing I looked at was smoking and saw that as the count of categories of ACEs went up, the percentage of people that smoked went up, and I was astonished. I'd never seen something like that before. And I started looking at all the other things like alcohol abuse and depression and teenage pregnancy and heart disease, and saw that as the score went up, all of these major public health problems that we collected as part of the survey went up in a stepwise fashion.
You know, when you think you read the latest cancer scare of the week in the newspaper, you know, something increases the likelihood of breast cancer or prostate cancer by 30%. And everybody's all upset about this, and here we're talking about thousands of percent.
I think there was a sense of disbelief. And people actually said, Rob, this can't be true. Because if this were really true, somebody would have already known about it and would have been studied and published. So there must be something wrong with the way you did the study. So we had to go back and recheck everything we'd done, and of course it was all correct.
And at that point it was clear to me that this was real, but that nobody wanted to know about it.
morning. Hi, how are you? So for me, here's what's crazy. Should I start with your head or with your toes? With your ears, okay, all right, let me take a look. When you look at adverse childhood experiences, they're actually a stronger predictor of risk of ischemic heart disease than any of the traditional risk factors when you think about high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or even smoking. Say, that's great. And yet, I was never trained on this in one day in medical school. For the ACE study, done in a community that is upper middle class, primarily Caucasian, when I looked at those health outcomes, immediately the question that came to my mind was, what does that mean for my kids in the community that I serve? When I came to San Francisco, when I finished my residency in 2005, you looked at the Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood of San Francisco versus the Marina District or Pac Heights. If you're a child born in Bayview Hunters Point, your life expectancy is 11 years shorter if you're born in Bayview versus if you're born on the other side of town. I kept on asking the question, why is it that we're seeing this in these communities?
Here in the Bayview, gun violence has killed 4 people just this month alone.
It's the highest rate of homicides in the city of San Francisco. And it also has the highest rate of ambulatory care hospitalizations any neighborhood in the cities. Heart disease, diabetes, you know, all of the above.
2 deadly shootings in the Bayview district of San Francisco. They happened late this afternoon, just minutes apart. The first shooting, 424 on Grove Street at Oakdale, less than 2 miles away.
There were some things that you were struggling with. And I think one of the things was his asthma management, but the other, some of the things was school. Like, we were not in that place with school.
He was having a difficult time, right along with a lot of other kids there, having a difficult time switching over from a normal routine to being scared to going back to a normal routine. It was very difficult.
A lot of families said, violence is a really big issue in our community. We need mental health services to help to deal with that. And do you know kids who have died?
My friend Sean just died a couple weeks, like last week. Somebody stabbed him. Part of the gang right up there. For a while,
They came in for a regular physical, but he's been acting out in school. Okay. Auntie seems overwhelmed and feels like she needs tools. We had hired a psychologist who was also on site seeing families with me at the clinic. One day he came into my office and he said, "Have you seen this?" And he handed me the ACEs study by Felitti and Anda. And honestly, it was like I was hit by a bolt of lightning. It was a total validation of what I was seeing in the kids that I was treating. Being in a community where you're hearing gunshots on the daily, where you are having friends who are being killed or being incarcerated, that really affects your body, right? Like it gets under your skin. We got the immunization rate up. We had nutritional counseling. So we were getting great health outcomes. But one of the big challenges that we found was that families were saying, "Dr. Burke, please, can you help Bobby?" Come on, Bobby. You gotta see Bobby. Bobby's falling out in class. He is hitting the kid next to him. He can't pay attention. He's running out of class. Please, Dr. Burke, he's got ADHD. Can you please put him on some Ritalin? And when I did a thorough history and physical, which is my job, it turned out that I couldn't make a diagnosis of ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, because a lot of the kids I was seeing had so many traumatic experiences in their life. Okay. Now, if you take a kid who's been exposed to trauma
They also will have difficulty with impulse control, difficulty with regulating their behavior. The big difference is if you give a child with an overactive stress response a stimulant, what do you think is going to happen? It's not going to help.
Feeling like me.
And so I think people were seeing the behavior,
but we're not getting to the root of what is causing the behavior.
But there's actually something functionally changing in their brain, and it's interesting how much activity overall they have when processing all types of emotions: happy, sad, fearful, angry. We tend to divide the world of mental health separate from the world of physical health, but the body doesn't do that. The body's only one.
Stressful or traumatic things can affect the health of kids. And so one of the things that we do here is that we screen all of our patients for what we call adverse childhood experiences, or these kind of stressful experiences in childhood. We don't need to know which ones, we only need to know how many.
It's intense, and getting folks to open up and all that stuff is very difficult. But here's the thing about it.
That may have occurred in your family.
We found that for kids at the Bayview Child Health Center, if they had an ACE score of 4 or more, they were 32 times as likely to have learning and behavior problems in school. 32 times as likely, right, than if you had an ACE score of 0.
The reality is that we all need a certain amount of stress, a certain amount of anxiety to perform well. If we don't care about that exam that we're going to have tomorrow, we'll probably fail. If we're going to cross the street and a truck is coming at us, we have release of adrenaline. We have release of a hormone that we call cortisol. We want to jump out of there, and adrenaline and cortisol are going to help us do that. So there's that good amount of stress. But if all day long you're feeling like a truck is coming at you, day after day after day, that's going to take a toll on the body. And the amygdala obviously here has greater activation in the PTSD. We were able to image children that had experienced trauma and compare those brain images with children that didn't have an experience of trauma, didn't have symptoms.
Right, an exaggerated fear response.
An exaggerated fear response with decreased activation in areas that we need to control that emotion, in the frontal areas.
Exposure to early adversity and trauma literally affects the structure and function of children's developing brains. So the kid next to them hits them, or the teacher reprimands them in a way that they're uncomfortable with, right? Literally what they're feeling, that activation is like there was a truck coming at them. You can give something that will mask symptoms, right? For example, if someone has a cough, right? You can give them a really strong cough serum that will suppress their cough. But if it's because they have tuberculosis or lung cancer, then what you're doing is merely masking the symptoms while the disease process continues to fester. We know what's happening in children's brains and bodies with the experience of toxic stress. So the question now is, what do we do about it?
You know, if I had to boil this down to one thing for people to learn from this science, it's to totally put to bed forever this sense that children who are born under disadvantaged circumstances are doomed to poor life outcomes. The science is saying that's just not true. You know, it's a thread that's not the all that I really love to highlight here, partly because, you know, we're all soulmates on this same issue, right? So there is a part of the world that really is invested in studying development, right? And then there's another part of the world. There's this larger policy context that's kind of trying to decide where to put resources, right? And trying to make good decisions. And I know, although there are huge political differences and how people feel about where the money should go, there are very few people who don't want to see good things happen for kids. So, but I think pediatricians naturally come to the need to be able to explain things to people.
This one here is the videos over the last 3 years.
Wow. And a lot of the science doesn't speak for itself. It's not like you can take the scientific paper and publish it in the local newspaper and have people understand it. So we coined the term toxic stress and started to try to explain to people how, you know, there's stress and there's stress. So, oh God, it's time to kind of look at the calendar again and see. Unfortunately, over the years, a lot of people have misused the term. Just talk to a friend and say, oh, so how you doing? Say, oh, I've had a terrible day. I'm experiencing such toxic stress. And I say, well, do you have anybody to turn to? Do you have any friends to talk to? Do you have any support? Oh, yeah, I've got plenty of support. You're not experiencing toxic stress. Because toxic stress is this chronic activation of stress systems with no buffering protection, no support. We don't say to the people who got cancer, why don't you suck it up and be like the person who didn't get cancer, right? But when we see this as a result, when we see it in problems in school or problems in behavior, we say to people, why don't you suck it up and, you know, be like that other guy who's doing well in school and who's not doing drugs. This is a real problem in terms of public understanding because we are so captivated by the self-made person. We are so captivated by the rugged individual. We are so caught up in this sense of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get over it. But the problem is when you're very young, when you're a baby, when you're a toddler, you can't pull yourself up by your booty straps. Everybody likes to talk about resilience and say kind of, what's resilience? And the one thing we know about it from a science point of view is it's not something you're born with. It's something that gets built over time. Can you learn how to deal with conflict constructively when you grow up hearing your parents screaming at each other every other night? Can you learn how to focus your attention when you live in a neighborhood where you hear gunshots and sirens? Can you control your impulses when you never know whether your father with a drinking problem is going to strike out in a rage? Can you delay gratification when all your friends around you are doing drugs? Can you plan for the future when it's hard to get through even a single day? Few women we spoke with in the projects who said what they loved about the project was it started by asking them on day one what they needed as people, rather than starting with how they could be better parents. You know, because is it easy? No. You know, it's going to take a lot of ingenuity, of course. But our kind of mantra on this, from the science, is if we want to produce dramatic impacts on the life outcomes for kids experiencing toxic stress, we have to transform the lives of the adults who are taking care of them. We need to do more than give parents information and advice. We need to do more than tell them to talk to their kids more and read to their kids. We need to build their capabilities in areas like planning and monitoring and problem solving and impulse control. So this would be a real human capital investment in an intergenerational approach to this, as opposed to just telling people to do better. Being part of changing the field, right? And the good news is that we have programs all over the country that are putting this science into action on the ground.
Well, how long has it started? The beginning. My kids are 16, 15, 9, 7, and 1. I have 4 baby fathers. I ended up in the hospital last Saturday with chest pains. And they said my heart was okay. So what was the cause? Anxiety. I came here for my daughter because she was displaying aggressive behavior that I was afraid of. She's 9. I was afraid of my daughter. I didn't want her to be like that. I came here for her. I sat in a session and her doctor said, "You need help."
Good. I heard good reviews. Someone was talking about how great it was working with you. So finally, science is catching up a little bit. They're realizing that a lot of the problems we've been trying to fix, substance use, domestic violence, and criminal activity, a lot of the underlying factors to the billions and billions and billions of dollars we spend a year are related to untreated adverse childhood experiences.
Cynthia, you've done it. You've done it. You know what? I'm going to ask you, and you shared so much with the group. What is...
I think the phenomenon of the ACE study, besides the findings of the lifelong health consequences, is that they actually dared to ask people, did any of these 10 things happen to you?
So based on some of the stuff that you went through as a child, is certainly impacting your life today.
To see them continue to be in relationships where they are being victimized over and over again as an adult, and then now having your children watch this, and then your children growing up, and then it happening to your children because it was never dealt with, is tough.
And as I said, this is a process, and you all know this. And so Cynthia, Cynthia did well. She brought her notebook. She's taking notes. Because we won't get to the solution tonight, Cynthia, but we're going to work through this. We're headed over to Cynthia's house. Cynthia is one of the women that participate in our multifamily group.
I've been alone a long time.
Well, you're not alone anymore.
I know this.
You're not alone anymore. You know, when you talk about ACEs, she hits many of those top 10 risk factors. I mean, she's used drugs, different sexual partners. By going in the home, you don't make them feel that they are less than, that they are somebody and that they do matter. That allows them to open up a little more. So you...
Yeah, I had to call the cops.
You had to call the police on him?
Yeah, he didn't want to leave. He back door, banging and kicking and screaming at me. Max was scared, Naomi was scared. He had to go, sorry.
Do you feel like you need to get a restraining order?
If he comes around again, I will.
So that's why your children missed the buses, Maureen.
I just got off the phone with the children's hospital to let them know, because right now Max told me, "Mommy, what if he hurts us? What if he hurts me?"
But you may want to get a restraining order, so you might want to be thinking about that. All right, so at least that part's clean. You feel better?
Yeah.
I try to make it easy for them, because I think that, when you grow up in these type of situations, that it's not something you talk about. I know I didn't.
All right, do you have your checklist?
I just kept it to myself. Didn't realize that it impacted me in any type of way. But then you think about relationships that you get into. You think about the way that you interact with your children and even other people, the way that you interact on your job. It's like, why am I like that? I mean, look, you're I know, but you're like so nervous.
Yeah, because everything bad's happening.
There's always a reason why we do what we do.
We're gonna talk about one thing at a time. But you have to pick up the phone and you've got to call.
And I remember being in a relationship when I was in high school. And it went from, you know, this low scale to this high scale where he actually took me out of school in front of, you know, other students and the teachers, and nobody intervened. I just remember, you know, being dragged up a hill and, you know, being placed behind bushes, and, you know, this individual telling me that I'm going to take you away because you're never going to leave me. I couldn't say anything. I know there was a part of me, like when I reflect on it, that wanted to talk about it, like get somebody to help me, but I was afraid. That relationship was about 5 years.
I don't reach out because I'm not used to that.
Okay, so then I'm gonna have to check in with you, because each day, you know, we gotta make a little progress.
That's why they wanted to put me in.
I look at the people that I encounter and I listen to their stories, and I understand their fears and their anxieties and why they are the way they are, and how important it is to have somebody that you can trust, that's not gonna judge you and be there just to support you and listen to you or hold you or hug you. What happened last night? What do you want to do?
I would need to call the police and file a report.
I understand because of what I didn't have, and when they tell me they don't have family, I tell them that it's okay because you can build it.
You stay with me.
Will I stay with you?
Yeah.
Keep going. You're doing great.
Coming to me.
What's that word? How did you figure that out?
Cause I read the sight words.
You do know your sight words, but eat? That's not a sight word. How did you figure that out?
Cause you helped me.
Me? No, ma'am. Who figured it out?
I did.
Did you figure it out? Pat yourself on the back. This is how the second graders do it, kindergarten kids.
I
This is
said
it.
after.
Don't you tell me you can't be a writer, sister. Look, I'm watching you write. Let's check it. You ready? Show me monsters again. Show me.
I never saw myself as a kindergarten teacher, but I'm exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Seeing their little kindergarten missing teeth faces. I love it.
Stand. Check yourselves. Make sure you've got control. Show me control. You're making me worry that you're going to get hurt.
You know, it's not just the kids who are jumping off the tables you have to worry about. It's the ones that just are really quiet and drawn back. And you're like, okay, it's not that they're shy. Something's going on with them. Something's happening in their world that they're either protecting themselves and not getting involved, or something's bothering them, that it's bigger than they are.
There's that sad face.
Something from a long time ago.
I think one thing adults fail to do for children is recognize that kids have stress. Because our stress seems so much more important because it's mortgage and how will I provide food. But the kids experience traumatic things that may not seem really big to us, but are important to them, and it could hamper their success.
We had here a lot of little kids coming to school the very first day. They got off of a bus. They couldn't tell us their name. They didn't know their family's name. We had a lot of kids being extremely emotional, not just because it was the first day of kindergarten, but this continued on. And I knew it wasn't because they were bad or they didn't want to behave, but kids, if they're acting out, there's a reason they're acting out. They can't articulate what the problem is because they don't have the skills to articulate it. I remember thinking, we've got to do something.
I remember the day that I drove to the Strong School to meet Susan. I had driven by that building for 20 years, and I would see the kids out there every day, and realizing that the kids there are under tremendous stress from a variety of problems, and that one day some of them will be coming here as clients. And it just became more and more clear to me that why are we waiting for them to fall apart, develop illnesses, get diagnosed, and then receive the very good but expensive treatments that we offer? We need to be where the kids are.
So, who knows what time it is? Boys and girls, you are right. It is Miss Kendra time. It's time to get our mail. Our flag is up, which means that our letters are here.
By using techniques to allow them to express what their worries are and their stress, to lower their experienced stress.
Boys and girls, what do we do before we get our mail? Miss Kendra! We do Miss Kendra's list. And
We're going to be able to help them maintain their resilience, and that's our goal.
Would anybody like to hear the legend of Miss Kendra? Okay.
They really want to believe in Miss Kendra.
Once upon a time, not too long ago, Miss Kendra lived near here. When Miss Kendra was a young woman, she gave birth to a child who she loved more than anything. But sadly, the child died around the age of 10. So she was very sad. Now, when Miss Kendra used to walk to work in the morning, she'd often stop at a school. She thought if only every child was safe. So she got permission to volunteer at the school, and she would stand at the front door greeting the students as they came off their buses. So one day, Miss Kendra began asking the students, "Hello, how are you? Are you okay?" "Yes." Yes, the students liked being asked, and they appreciated being asked even when they were doing okay. But as the days went on, she began to ask deeper questions and harder questions like, "Have you been left alone? And is anyone at home sick? And are you being hurt?" So, as the years went on, all the questions that Miss Kendra asked became known as Miss Kendra's List! That's right, they became known as Miss Kendra's List. Who's ready? Repeat after me. No child should be punched or kicked. No child should be punched or kicked. That's right. No child should be left alone for a long time. No child should be left alone for a long time.
The sad thing is a lot of our students think that what they're going through is normal. This is their normal. If no one's given them anything to think otherwise, I think that's where the cycle just keeps going and going and going.
No child should be bullied.
No child should be bullied.
No child should be touched in their private parts.
No child should be touched in their private parts.
No child should.
When I saw that phrase, I was totally okay with it because I know it's a reality. And I know it is something that these children, because the stories that they tell and the pictures that they draw, they absolutely know way more than they should know.
And I think when you start to address it early on, like when they're 4 and they're 5, and they hear the same message that you're cared for, no child should be punched or kicked. If that's their mantra in their head, and I hope that in 10 years, they'll have had 10 years of hearing that. So it won't get to the point where they're 15 and we're like, what happened? How did they get to this point? And like, what do we do with them now? That part of it's not rocket science.
So boys and girls, who wants to write to Miss Kendra? Okay.
Boogeyman? It is gone.
Oh, that's the boogeyman's car. What's this over here?
Me.
That's you? Whenever you write to Miss Kendra, she will always write back to you. I know, you got your letter today.
I love my letter.
You love your letter? Oh, I'm so glad. I'll let Miss Kendra know.
This year, as we're in year 3, so I'm seeing my kindergartners now in 3rd grade, and what a difference. I feel that overall, the drama therapy has provided a calmness.
Where we have done this, the parents and the children's ratings of safety in the school and school climate surveys have shot way up. Because actually naming the scary thing helps us feel safer. And the teachers who spend less time managing behaviors have more time actually teaching. Many strict school reform programs have what's called this no excuses policy. Yes, you might be living in poverty. Yes, you might be subject to racism. Yes, you might be being beaten at night. But that's not an excuse not to perform in school. Our approach is not that it is an excuse. Our approach is that we need to deal with it. We're not there to say, therefore, you don't have to do your schoolwork. We want you to express it to be able to find ways of being more resilient and to cope with it. What we're finding is that children as young as kindergartners all the way up through high school are quite capable of doing that. And they're interested in doing that. It engages them because it's about what's really happening.
Welcome. Thanks so much for coming.
We were saying, what are we going to do? You're like in the Bay Area right now.
There was a certain point where I feel like I was recognizing I can sit here with this child in this exam room and kind of be doing the same thing day after day after day, but recognizing this isn't just an issue for kids in Bayview.
Welcome to the Center for Youth Wellness building. The day is finally here. Congratulations. This vision and put forth a plan to create a one-stop center dedicated to the prevention, screening, and healing of young people exposed to toxic stress.
It's incredible work, and it truly will be a model for the country.
We did it!
Okay.
Currently, much of medicine sees this as a social problem.
Good morning, my dear.
And it falls into this tricky area that folks kind of don't want to touch.
Right? Because we don't want to say a child has an unhealthy brain. Yeah. The brain is adapted to their environment.
For me, I view it as very much like a neurochemical problem, an endocrine problem, a problem of chronic inflammation. And figuring out how to solve that feels like it's very much within the purview of medicine.
Can I get a high five? Can I get a high five? I'm very happy to hear that you are doing better in school. I want to ask you, do you feel like any of the interventions that we have been doing have been making a difference?
Absolutely. I think they made all the difference in the world.
We know that there are things that we can do to intervene. Number one is universal screening for adverse childhood experiences at the Well Child Check as part of every kid's physical. His ACE score was a 5. Then, once you've identified that this child has 4 ACEs, or they have 3 ACEs, and they have symptoms that are going along with that, then the question is, what do we do? The current state of the science says, number one, we need to start by reducing the child's dose of adversity. If I see a kid in clinic and they have lead poisoning, the first thing I'm going to do is reduce their dose of lead. Someone from the county goes out to the house and figures out how to do a lead abatement, right? It's literally the same thing. So we use a nurse home visiting model to figure out what are the challenges that the family is dealing with and really see it from their perspective. In many ways, right, the cure for toxic stress is strong parental buffering.
Whatever is the best for them, that's all I want.
And so recognizing what are the natural and endemic strengths that we can use to strengthen that parent as a buffer.
Everything that you've gone through and wanting a better life for yourself and for your children, with them seeing you be persistent, they're going to be persistent as well.
You know, good old-fashioned therapy, right? Still works. And we know that mindfulness, and in particular meditation, it really helps kids to be able to identify when they're having that feeling and giving them tools to be able to bring their systems back under control. There's a lot that you can do with nutrition, exercise, maintaining really good sleep hygiene. And then, of course, we do education. I think education is really key around ACEs and toxic stress.
But so her dad moved out for a period of time.
Do you notice her being a little bit more anxious or anything like that?
Yeah, she is.
Okay. Okay. Because just as we know, back in the day, parents used to smoke in the car with all the kids in the back with the windows rolled up because they didn't know that secondhand smoke was really bad for kids. Do you think that she may have internalized some of that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. That experiencing toxic stress, it actually affects the child's development. That's something that many parents don't understand because it's not immediately intuitive. Understand how to help her manage her anxiety, given the situation that's happened at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
would be helpful. Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah.
So, being trauma-informed. How many of you heard of the idea of being trauma-informed? Probably a lot of you, okay. 6 years ago, almost no hands would go up. So, the basic premise of being trauma-informed is a conceptual frame shift by saying it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. It's what happened to you. So here we are in Middle America, Columbus, Ohio. This is a well-educated group of people here, right? We have social workers, psychologists, healthcare providers, law enforcement. What we're going to try to do here is each one of you has something called Finding Your ACE score that's in your packet. So if you're comfortable, this is anonymous and it's voluntary to see what the ACE score is among this audience. As I was beginning to be asked to travel more and speak, what I began to do was hand out the one-page Finding Your ACE score to everybody in the audience and have them voluntarily and anonymously fill it in and put it in a box. And what I've found is that if people understand when they're asked about these 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences, if they already know that those experiences are common, they're more likely to be relieved, I think, than frightened. Because there's something that's really kind of a miracle, which is that they don't feel alone anymore. That I'm not the only one that experiences these kind of things.
Thank you.
Okay, so here is, on this table, is the ACE scores. We have the ACE scores for the Kaiser Permanente population, and what we see for us today is that at the low end, there's much fewer people with ACE scores of 0 or 1. And as you go down to ACE scores where you really see things change is at ACE scores of 4 or more. 34% of people in this audience have ACE scores of 4 or more, which is more than double that of what we saw in the Kaiser Health Plan. So this is something that I use as a tool to say, where are the adversities? Is it out there in people that we treat? Is it out there in certain communities? Or is it everywhere? And it's something that I see universally when I do the ACE scores of audiences. Actually, the highest ACE scores that I ever got were at the annual meeting of the American Academy of Psychotherapists. So the intergenerational cycle.
Taking the test was really interesting to just stop and think about, what have I experienced? What have I gone through? How has that shaped me? And when you see the correlation between the adverse events and then the increased risk for all kinds of stuff, we are a sum of everything that we have lived.
For the ACE scores that I did have, it made me reflect on, okay, how did healthy doses, having a healthy relationship and a healthy community, help me combat that adversity?
I took the ACE evaluation, and I got a score of an 8, and it brought back a lot of memories about things. I mean, I'm 65 years old, and I guess what's important about that for me is not to dwell on that so much, but to try to have some impact on other people around me, and maybe not let them get as old as I got before I finally started dealing with it, you know, started figuring out how to live my life.
We've had these little disruptive innovations that's probably the more uncomfortable part, because my number wasn't 0 or 1. But if you know what your score is and you know that you have these risk factors, then you have the ability to do something about that. And it's not just those kinds of things that happen in the psychiatric field, but you know, like COPD, heart disease, those kinds of things. And as a nurse, I'm looking at, wow, that, you know, we could intervene. We could prevent that.
A question, but you asked what some of us were doing, and our police force in Dayton, Ohio, wanted me to come and do training on trauma-informed care approaches.
This is public health information that everybody in the country really should be exposed to and understand and be safe with.
There's probably lots of right answers.
That's what I'm thinking too, is a lot of times it's just noticing and picking them up. Like they're already sitting there, but they're not necessarily the majority way of doing things. Because we all have been trained in different disciplines. We kind of speak different languages. We all care about the same things, but we've been trained to care about them. And so we were asking ourselves the question, what information, if it were flowing through all of the communities and organizations in our state, would make a big shift occur? So I'm a really impatient person, sorry, but I like big change. And for 10 years, we navigated an explosion of education, of dialogue, of community building, etc.
And if you can weave the science through these different sectors and get it into the hands of the general population, they will invent very wise actions.
there's beginning to be sort of a general consciousness that people from all of these different interest groups, they believe what they see in examples from other states. And I think people really want this to happen.
Later on, if an old saying, like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, but you can make him thirsty.
You can easily create cognitive dissonance with it.
You know what I've been trying to figure out though is what are the frameworks of other movements that we could use as templates? You know, I keep thinking about the smoking thing. It didn't start with immediate bans and smoking in bars.
But clearly the big question is, what's next? Resilience is not something that's just a matter of grit and determination. It's not a matter of writing a prescription. It's hard work, but the answer and the promised land, I really believe, is within our grasp.
We have to look across our entire population, or else we will miss this public health crisis as it's happening in front of us. You know, I really see myself as, you know, this little pediatrician who decided to hang a shingle in Bayview Hunters Point.
Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, she's a pediatrician from California.
Yeah, so the term adverse childhood experiences comes from the seminal study that was done by the CDC. I've been surprised at the reception that folks, when they see the science, say, wow, this is something we need to do something about.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 2013 Gold Foundation Humanism Medicine Award, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris.
30 years from now, my vision and dream is this problem going to be solved? By no means. But the policy landscape, the treatment infrastructure, the research dollars, the attention and investment, all of this will be so embedded in the infrastructure that I will have my, you know, my grandkids on my knee, and I'll be explaining to them about back in the day when this thing of toxic stress was just emerging, and can you believe we didn't have all the systems that we now have in place? And it happens from the work of every single person in this room, every parent, every person who we talk to and we touch, because it's not anything that any one of us does, but we as a community of Americans, we are at a tipping point. We will get to our goal.
In every school in America, walking down every street in America, there are the kids that get labeled. Get rid of them. They're nothing but trouble. Lincoln sits right in the heart of the most assaults, gang activity, truancy.
I did hear that it was the worst school you could ever go to.
Kids had knives, fights, absolute chaos.
He pissed me off and I threw a chair at him. And I told him I was gonna kill him.
All of them were methed out.
I was invited to go to a conference about complex trauma and what stress does to the brain.
The behavior isn't the kid. The behavior is a symptom of what's going on in their life.
My mom was like, get your shit and leave. She's the only thing I had. And for her to abandon me like that.
His coping mechanism was drinking a ton, smoking a ton.
I remember one night, I didn't want to be alive.
It hit me, and it hit me really hard.
You have to unconditionally love them, and you have to believe that their behavior might be out of their control.
I love playing guitar with several of these guys. I feel like that's almost as strong as anything we ever do in class.
After that, he wasn't only a discipline figure, he was like a friend.
Half of the student body had over a 3-point GPA. To watch their confidence come back has been incredible.
I'm not by myself anymore. I got a team.
If I can do it, all of you can definitely do it.
It's not that I'm judging you. I know why you're smoking weed. I know why you smoke meth. I know why you're in fights you don't want to feel. I mean, that's the big challenge is I'm asking you to try feeling for a little bit because sometimes when you feel, it guides you in the direction that you should be going and not to where you are.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Resilience is about overcoming adversity. It's about how you think and how you view the world. When something bad happens to you, do you see it as a catastrophe or do you see it as an opportunity? Are you able to tell the difference between something that's a real tiger versus something that just feels like a tiger? Because stress is designed into our bodies so that we can deal with a tiger that's going to attack us, right? And the key is that you have to be able to tell the difference between something that can really chew your face off or just feels like it might. The resilience mindset can tell the difference between something real and something that only worries you. Unconditional love, it gives human beings the security that allows them to move forward and to take chances. That's the bottom line of being able to handle almost anything. I am loved, I am valued, and people know who I am inside. That allows people to thrive through good and bad times, and that's what resilience is.
Finding your ACE score is what it's called, and it's a simple one-page questionnaire that I developed as a really short version of what was done in the study to get the 10 categories of ACEs that people can fill out with a checklist in about 5 minutes. Count the number of categories of ACEs up and get what we call their ACE score, which is the number of ACEs they experienced. I mean, I think of the ACE score as a measure of the childhood dose of adversity or stress. More accumulation of adversity tends to mean more and more risk of health and social problems.
An A score is not a label. It represents someone's personal story.
So I think it's really important for anybody thinking about the A score to understand that it's really it's a personal history tool. It's to create understanding and compassion. Number one, if you've had adversity, you're not alone. Number two, that if you had adversity, it doesn't necessarily mean it's destiny in your life. It can help you to frame what happened to you. So I think it has an empowering effect on people to get their own A scores.
We had 24% of the people that had 4 or more adverse effects, which is kind of actually what I would expect.
Today did make me think about how I was raised and how I dealt with certain adversities.
I took the ACEs test today, and it was my first time. However, I was not alarmed, only because I knew the issues growing up in my own family, and I knew that, just common sense told you that would have some impact. But once you understand, you can do things about it. So I've made some adjustments on life, and I probably will continue to make adjustments.
If you know what your score is and you know that you have these risk factors, then you have the ability to do something about that.
It might be not so good.
People who have gone through this experience, these are the things that we're more likely to see in them, and this is the reason why, and it's actually part of their biology, right? And it's actually a natural biological reaction. And that is something that we can work on and heal.
Give me a reflex, ready? Oh, there you go.
One of the really nice things that's beginning to happen is there are whole service systems now that are working with primary care providers to get ACE histories using the Finding Your ACE Score type tool and embedding social workers and behavioral health providers or psychologists and integrating them into the primary care practice so that the primary care provider can be comfortable asking the questions and open the gate for the kind of services that people need. This understanding is creating changes in the way discipline is done in the schools, so that suspension expulsion rates are dropping in schools that use this information. Graduation rates are rising. There's beginning to be an understanding that there needs to be sort of a more compassionate justice, and that many of the people, especially the young kids that are in the system, they're not bad kids. They're kids that adapted by taking on certain behaviors related to their experiences.
Instead of thinking about what's wrong with someone, you're asking the question, what happened to them? I think then you're able to be maybe a little more forgiving of other people and compassionate.
When you hear about someone's childhood history and you understand that it maybe has affected them, it shouldn't change what you think of their being, but it might change the conversations you have with them and how you relate to them.
It's an agent of empathy. It gives you more grace in dealing with whoever you're dealing with.
And one of the important things that's happening with this work is it's normalizing discussion about adversity, that it's okay to talk about it, and it's not taboo, and that adverse childhood experiences are something that most people experience one or more of in their lifetime.
Over a happy day and a sad day.
It opens up people's hearts, and they say, oh, I get it now.
Adverse childhood experiences, trauma in childhood, literally transforms the structure and functioning of the brain.
And
and as a consequence, it can have lifelong implications for learning and behavior and health.
You can tell when there's stress. You can just look and listen, and you get those answers.
Whether that's being abused or witnessing a violent crime, whether it's having parents go through a violent divorce or seeing abuse between your parents.
The unrelenting, unrelieved, unbuffered, unmitigated toxic stress affects the child's brain, affects the child's way of being in the world.
We now understand the biological underpinnings as to what's causing these associations between early childhood adversity and life course trajectories. That opens up new opportunities for intervention.
We can prevent all kinds of chronic disease. Keep in mind, heart disease is the #1 killer in the United States. We have a way to identify folks who are 3.5 times higher risk of developing heart disease. I mean, we have to do something about that.
Our opportunities, I think, are to identify folks who are at risk for those kinds of toxic experiences early and work with those families to identify protective opportunities.
Universal screening for adverse childhood experiences at the Well Child Check as part of every kid's physical. How are you doing?
Good. So tell Dr. Burke how much better you're doing in school than last year.
I'm doing good in school.
Breathe in. For those kids who have an ACE score of 4 or more, right? So now we've identified them. They're high risk. We know what their relative risk is for all these different health outcomes. How do we prevent those things from happening?
We've made huge strides in preventing many life-threatening infectious diseases through the use of our vaccinations and immunizations. And I think it's a nice analogy to really think about the fact that we could immunize children through promoting healthy environments and healthy social and emotional development, and that will protect them over the long run from having major health issues later on.
We never had anyone come into the community who cared enough to ask, well, what is the problem? What is causing all of this?
How can we expand their social support network? How can we link them with community supports that can really drive down the impact of the toxic stress? How can we help them to improve their own coping skills so that they're able to be healthier themselves and therefore create a more healthy environment for their child?
One of the reasons that pediatrics is a wonderful field and a wonderful way to spend your life, and one of the reasons that primary care is as joyful as it is that most parents, almost all parents, really want to do this right. They really want to do a good job. They really want to take care of that new baby. And things get in the way for a lot of people.
Probably the best examples that we have of truly effective interventions that we can offer to families are home visiting programs.
Hi, look at you.
We know that if we start to work with mothers even while they're pregnant, that we can have a significant impact in improving the mother's coping skills, but also improving their parenting practices so that they're able to support their child's development.
My practice is entirely a rural practice, and about 70% of my patients are on Medicaid because it is a poor area. We started something called the WOW van. WOW stands for Wheels of Wellness, and they go out and pick up families and take them not just to my office, but if they have to go to the dentist, they'll take them to the dentist. Or if the mother has a premature baby in the newborn intensive care unit in Mobile, they'll take her over to visit her baby. And it goes all the time. I mean, it's constantly going. In fact, I'll tell my patients, we're going to give you a follow-up appointment. Go ahead and call the WOW van, and if they can't take you at that time, we'll change your appointment.
Reach Out and Read, a national medical program which uses the platform of the pediatric primary care visit, the Well Child visit, the checkup, to promote parents reading aloud to very young children. Use the book to create the kind of routines, the kind of security in a child's day. Oh, this is how I know it's nap time. This is how I know it's bedtime. This is how I get mom or dad's full attention. I'm on her lap, I'm hearing his voice, and it makes me feel secure. I know what's going on. So that when we come back to this question that we've been talking about toxic stress and about resilience, I think one of the really important lessons that I've learned is that parents can create routines and security which really comfort young children, even when the family is living in adverse circumstances.
But we should never give up. We always have opportunities to be able to work with a child regardless of their age.
When we operate in a loving, trauma-informed way that is about recognizing and building on strengths, all of us can be healers to these kids.
In different ways, toxic stress walks into the exam room every day, and in different ways, resilience can walk out of that exam room.
Can I get a high five? Can I get a high five?
It became possible to start to understand actually, so what is it about poverty or violence or abuse or neglect that leads to problems later? Why do kids who've experienced so much hardship get sick more? How does poverty get into the body? How does racism and discrimination get into your body and cause you to have more heart disease and hypertension and diabetes? So this was like an amazing new frontier for me and for a lot of other people. When we talk about toxic stress, we're talking about the physical experience of stress. So think about a time when you were maximally stressed out. Different people have it in different ways. It may be a headache or a knot in your stomach, or you feel your heart racing, or you're sweating, or you have pain in your back, whatever it is. What you're feeling is the stress response that's activated. And the stress response is our friend. It's good to have a stress response. This is what allows us to deal with serious challenges or threats. But it wasn't meant to be up all the time. It's kind of meant to deal with an acute threat. You deal with the threat, and the stress system goes back to baseline, and you feel physically not stressed anymore. And as we started to look at the biology of this more, we realized that a lot of these physiological changes that help you deal with an immediate threat, if they stay activated, they actually now start to have, over time, a wear and tear effect on your body. Your blood sugar is up to give you more energy to deal with a threat. But if your blood sugar stays up for prolonged periods of time, it can create insulin resistance and make you more vulnerable to get diabetes. It accelerates the formation of plaques in your coronary arteries. So we started to look at this and said, well, whoa, this is beginning to open up this black box of why people who've experienced great hardship have more health problems and have more learning problems. Genetics, for sure, makes you either more or less susceptible to certain outcomes. These things do have a genetic basis. But whether you end up with the problem is going to be a function of the kind of environment that you're in. Now we're talking about the building blocks of resilience. Everybody likes to talk about resilience and say kind of, what's resilience? And the one thing we know about it from a science point of view is it's not something you're born with. It's something that gets built over time. And it's built by an environment that helps you develop those skills that are necessary to overcome challenge. I just tacked on.
Right. And how do you make it relevant for a community that it sounds like maybe other interventions haven't drawn out community participation?
It made for a better model because you know from the participants what works for us.
What about families who are dealing with deep poverty, substance abuse, intimate partner violence, depression? Our hypothesis or theory of change is that in those circumstances, we need to do more than give parents information and advice. We need to do more than tell them to talk to their kids more and read to their kids. We need to build their capabilities in areas like planning and monitoring and problem solving and impulse control. So our kind of mantra on this from the science is if we want to produce dramatic impacts on the life outcomes for kids, we have to transform the lives of the adults who are taking care of them. What's been missing from the field is the stuff we've been talking about, which is to kind of take the science and bring it with its uncertainties into the practical world and not let the practical world ignore the uncertainties and just want to know exactly what to do. And in the same way, not have the practical world be afraid to kind of figure out what to do differently. If the 20th century was a century of physics and chemistry, the 21st century is the story of the revolution in biology, and we are learning how kind of individual differences in health and learning and behavior happen. And I think most people appreciate that that revolution is going to transform healthcare. In this area, we desperately need new ideas, right? And they need to be grounded in science, and we need to be humble that whatever we know now is not hopefully what we're going to know 10 years from now. So that's great.
So my question is then,
there's a sense of futility and hopelessness about whether we'll ever end poverty or violence or discrimination. And what this new science could do, that could be the big story, is that we have a whole new body of knowledge now that could open up new ways of thinking about what we have up till now been seen as intractable, unsolvable problems. The potential for positive life outcomes across the board in learning and behavior and health is there at birth in all children.
I remember a few instances when I would see my dad hit my mom, and me being I was only 4 or 5, and I tried to step in, but I mean I was young and I couldn't really do much. He hit me too, and my mom, that's why my mom left, because he was going to hit me that day, and she grabbed me and she ran to the car, and we left.
it was a big blow up. And it's so funny how when you feel they threaten you, it doesn't, you think, oh, it'll be okay. But when he threatened Robert, that's when, I said, no. I can defend myself, I can take whatever, but I can't let him hurt my child.
I mean, I didn't understand really why we were leaving, but I just went with my mom because I trusted her, and I felt that she had the best intentions for us, the family.
I never realized, but I should have realized, if I'm an adult and all the turmoil that I went through with my health, with leaving my home, and he's just a child. Imagine how he's feeling.
When my mom got real sick, I got very upset about that. So I started acting out I would steal. I started to steal a lot. I stole money from her a couple of times, and the worse she got, the worse the stealing got.
And I remember I was reprimanding him, and he put his hand up and hit me. And I said, you can't do that. I'm your mother. He goes, but my dad did it. And I said, that's not good.
Robert, a very bright young man, he was acting out. He was becoming aggressive as a way to defend himself.
He taught me why I was stealing, because I didn't really understand why I was stealing. I felt as though I was getting back at her for being sick and for like yelling at me, but it was really just me being upset at the fact that she was sick.
That's the way he was dealing with the trauma.
And when I started to think about like why I was doing all the things I was doing, I realized that it's not helping anyone in the long run. So he said, like I should separate myself from a situation, and like instead of yelling back at my mom, I should like separate myself and count to 10, and then that way I could cool myself off before, and then try to have a civilized conversation with her.
Self-regulation is the ability for someone to shift states from a dysregulated emotional state to a calm state or a different state.
I got into an argument with my mom maybe a couple of days after he had told me about the first strategy about like counting to 10, and I separated myself and I counted to 10, and then I came back to her like maybe an hour later, and I had a conversation with her about the argument.
Really look at the strengths that exist in the family and the individual and harness those strengths to facilitate the most positive environment within which change can happen.
After attending Clifford Beers, my grades got higher and higher. So I think after I left Clifford Beers, I had honor roll. Actually, ever since I left Clifford Beers, I've been on the honor roll.
Tell me about Carlo.
He's my knight in shining armor that came to visit in a green Mazda instead of a white horse.
He's been there since I was 7 years old. Anything I've ever needed, Carlos has been there. He's been there when my mom was sick. Like, he's helped me get through a lot of tough times in my life.
You think you're alone, but you're really not sometimes. And, you know, a lot of people care for, I told Robert, you don't know how lucky you are that there's so many people, you don't even know how many people care about you and are worried about you along with me.
I don't know if I would be where I'm at today if it wasn't for Clifford Beers, because I think that I would still be doing some of the negative things that I was doing prior to me being here.
I think it's success that a family walks through the door, because the courage it takes to be able to come to psychotherapy and talk about difficult life events is huge. I have utmost respect for anyone who walks through the door, and that's success immediately.